We know that you want to know about fermentation, and who better to ask than the author of 5 fermentation books and co-founder of the Fermentation School, Kirsten Shockey. With over 20 years' experience of fermentation, Kirsten has so much to share that will inform, enlighten, and frankly change the way you eat. Hear how she got started, the answers to the most common questions she gets, how fermentation deepens us as humans, why women are so valuable as part of the tradition, and all about the course she's filmed that'll get fermented foods onto your and even your skeptical family's plates at every single meal. And check out the link in the show notes. It will take you to the course we talk about with a special podcast discount already applied.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Allison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hello, Allison. Good morning.
Hi, good afternoon, Andrea. How are you doing?
I'm well, and welcome to our guest, Kirsten Shockey. Super stoked to have you on the podcast today, Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So many of you will know Kirsten already because she is a master fermenter. She started fermenting over 2 decades ago, and she is the author of 5 fermentation books, as well as being the co-founder of the Fermentation School, which is a virtual hub of fermentation learning where she teaches many courses as well. Thank you for coming and talking to us today, Kirsten.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice to chat about fermentation.
Yeah, indeed.
So the first question we always ask both each other and our guest is, what did you last eat before hopping on to record today?
Well, it was, I haven't eaten breakfast this morning, but it was Thanksgiving. It was Halloween last night, but I didn't have any candy. I actually had a beautiful chicken soup.
Oh, wow. Did you put any ferments in with it?
You know, I would have if I was at home, but I was at my I guess let's see, my daughter-in-law's grandparents' house, and she cooked the food. We live way out in the middle of nowhere, so in order to support the grandchildren trick-or-treating, we have to go find a subdivision. And so that was our city life kind of adventure. The meal before that, though, was breakfast, and I had a wonderful bowl of sautéed last of the garden vegetables and just some plain sauerkraut on top. I've been kind of into plain sauerkraut lately, which is kind of funny. Every once in a while I go back to just that real basic flavor.
Yeah.
Well, there are so many
Classic.
flavours in sauerkraut that and for me, every batch is slightly different. You've got different cabbages, and I've left it for a different length of time. It's something slightly different, and I taste new things every time I try it.
For sure, for sure. I'm really excited. We got some local cabbages the other day that as soon as I just cut the cabbage in half, the liquid, the water in it just started dripping out. I've
Oh, my
never seen one
goodness.
quite that
Wow.
juicy. So I'm excited to see what it will taste like.
When Allison kind of started giving me some of the rundown on your story, which is amazing, and I feel like there's so many questions I want to ask you that have nothing to do with fermenting. We also live far away. There's nowhere to go trick-or-treating around here if we wanted to. We also heat our house with wood stove. We also homeschool 3 kids. Like
Nice.
so many things that I love about what you're doing. But can you tell us How and when did you start fermenting?
Yeah, so I started fermenting with goats and cows moving onto the property,
Nice.
and large old ancestral, not ancestral, that's the wrong word, but heritage apple trees. I mean, these guys are huge and, for here, very old, probably 150 years old. Let's see, that was 25 years ago now. And yeah, so my first ferments, I wasn't really thinking of as ferments. I was culturing milk and making a lot of cheese every day and yogurt and all the things. But it's funny because at that point in time, I didn't think of it till recently that we weren't using the word fermentation the way we are now. And people weren't
Right.
fermenting as a thing.
Right.
And so I was just, trying to make cheese. I was dairying, which there were no people doing that around here. It just really the internet wasn't what it is now. So it just really felt like reinventing the wheel and trying to find what was out there, in library books. And there weren't a lot of, now there's a lot of wonderful library books, or not library books, but any books on dairying, but there wasn't. And then simultaneously, we had apples and we were making cider and we were freezing it all as sweet cider. And at some point it was just, these apple trees, are huge and it was just too much. And so we started making cider. In the U.S., they call it hard cider. The rest of the world, it's cider is fermented.
Yeah.
And so we started to make cider and, of course, vinegar from that. So those were my first ferments. And it wasn't until a few years later that I actually started fermenting vegetables again, due to trying to preserve the abundance of the garden in the best way possible. I had 4 kids at home at the time, homeschooling, and I felt passionate at that time. I don't really know why I was led to feel that way, but that they knew where their food came from, and that felt like a huge lesson that needed to happen. So we definitely dug in to all of that.
That's amazing.
Did you find a big difference in your health when you started fermenting stuff, or was it just because you wanted to use the produce and that's kind of what drove you and that's what you focused on?
Yes, part B. I can't say that. I mean, we were young, and I didn't have any real health issues that I was aware of anyway. And so, yeah, it was just we moved these foods into our life, and I'm sure I'm healthier now for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you said you didn't come to vegetables until much later, but you've got your fermented vegetables book and you've got Fiery Ferments, which has got a lot of vegetables on. Do you still like to go and ferment dairy and cider? Are those your favourite ferments, or are veg ferments your favourite ferments now?
Well, once a year, definitely we need to deal with the apples. And so cider is just a given. But I prefer making it to vinegar. I've really become a huge vinegar fan. So we had a small fermentation company, and vegetables is what we fermented. I, part of the kind of the evolution of this homestead dream at some point, at first we just bought the property and moved out to the woods. I wanted my children, like I said, to be connected with where their food came from. But even more so, I wanted them to be connected with the earth and with the ground, that, and the trees and all of that. And so that was the original genesis for moving here. As that developed, as we had big gardens and all the things, Christopher, my husband, was working remotely back when that was definitely not a thing that was done. And it was really hard on his career. And so we, we always had this kind of dream in the back of our head that, there's got to be a way to make the homestead into something that would be financially viable, and maybe he could stop, working for a large corporation to make all this happen. And so the idea was this. Once I started fermenting vegetables, I was like, wow, this is easy. It was 2009. And I'd been fermenting them for much longer, but in 2009, I was like, why? The kids were getting old enough that some were on their off to college and some were teenagers. And I thought, well, it could be a little family business, which was great for about a year and a half. Super successful. I loved working with the local farmers to take care of their overages or their seconds or things that were about to go. I mean, I was kind of doing that full utilization, zero waste idea back with the farmers then, when that wasn't also a phrase, a catchphrase. And I had a lot of fun just saying, this is this week's ferment when I went to the market. And we had a regular, steady supply of customers. Things were selling well. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, one, we live in a small area, and to get to the point where we were actually making money, and able to pay ourselves would have required scaling up and going in, being part of a food system that wasn't ever my intention. I really wanted to keep it very, very local. At the time, I was really good friends with professional kraut makers in both San Francisco and Washington State. And the one in San Francisco, she could get cabbages at that time for, in season for, anywhere from 60 to 90 cents a pound. And my local cabbages were never less than $2.50 a pound. And so there were just so many reasons that wasn't going to work. And meanwhile, I had started to teach folks, because people were interested at the market stand, and they were curious. And so I'd bring people out to our kitchen, our commercial kitchen out here that we had, and teach classes. And that first book was really born from that. I was trying to take everything that people asked and everything that seemed to scare people and put it in a place. And I was honestly much more interested in playing with flavor than, making the same 3 flavors over and over again to distribute it, across the Northwest.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I was doing the 30-day course, which we'll talk about a bit later, I read something you wrote in there, which was that you had someone else who was at the market with you, and that the sauerkraut brine shots kind of took off to the point where those were being sold, and he was making sauerkraut to make brine, and the sauerkraut itself was a byproduct. And it seemed a crazy example of how something that, you in your heart know works so beautifully when it's on the farm with the local produce, feeding a family and feeding your friends, right to the kind of taking it to market and having it become something trendy. And it just recounting that story, I never would have believed that someone would have been making sauerkraut to sell the brine, not the sauerkraut.
I know, isn't that crazy? And then they would squeeze it, and then the dried up, but the very dry sauerkraut then was actually sent to pigs. So the whole thing was just ridiculous.
Absolutely bonkers. So lots of people who listen to the podcast ferment. Some of them have been doing it for a long time. Some of them are only just starting. And a lot of the questions that Andrew and I get are about fermentations. And there are so many different questions. I wonder, from all your kind of working at home and then teaching loads of classes and going online with your classes, what are the questions you most often get about fermentation?
They're still, after all these years, still fear-based. It's still,
Oh man.
less of a question, but sort of a statement. I don't want to kill my family. I don't want to kill anybody with
Yep.
this. And
Yep.
what they're really saying
All
is,
the
I'm
time.
scared all the time, right, Andrea? All the time. And it's like, so I think the questions still are around the safety and just getting folks past what has been drummed into our heads and, our parents' heads before that in the last however many years, that all microbes are germs. So moving past that, I think that's really at the top.
And do you have something that you've said to people like hundreds of times about that you can hand to the people who are listening, whose partner might go to them, "You're going to be killing me with this ferment. What are you doing?"
Yeah, well, I mean, I quote Fred Bright, USDA microbiologist, and he just, he says nobody has ever died from properly fermented vegetables. Yep. And usually we laugh at the word properly. And then I explain that when ferments go bad, they will absolutely let you know they're bad. They're not, there's no hidden, lurking, tasteless, odorless thing like there is in botulism. They will let you know they're gross. It smells bad. I mean,
Yes.
all your senses say, do not put me in your mouth. So, yeah, we joke about it, and then I explain the science and acidity and what's going on.
I love that answer, because both with canning and with fermenting, people literally ask me that all the time, and that exact phrase, "I don't want to kill my family," which is a fair point. Nobody wants to kill their family. But I always tell them, well, if you really want to be super, super safe, just ferment things. You'll
Right.
really be safe. And I said the same thing. Nobody can convince you to eat it when it's going bad. Like, you could not be convinced to eat it. You would know.
So true. You were here because your ancestors fermented and they knew not to eat it when it was bad.
Yeah. Yep. So, of course, this is the perfect segue to my favorite question, which is, can you tell us about a fermentation disaster, something that went wrong in your experience?
Oh, I know.
We blocked them out, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a way there's so many, and in a way, to me, I don't know. I'm trying to form my words around this, but to me, like, I get what's going on, so nothing ever feels disastrous. Like, usually it's
Totally.
a result of it being a neglected child, and you go in there and you're like, oh man, yeah. I guess I just don't have those, like, explosive tales. Although, I've only had one bottle explode on me, and it was
Wow.
It was a ginger bug where I'd let too much air get into the bottle and not burped it enough. And so I think, to me, those, and then you come into the kitchen and you're like, oh my God, if somebody would have been standing in here, that's probably like the most, like, disaster, as in, like, somebody could have actually gotten hurt. But yeah, most of my disasters are like, wow, that's stinky. Or that was really ignored. I'm sorry.
Disasters are kind of anticlimactic with ferments because everything moves so slowly.
It's so true. But something that I had that I thought was kind of great, it was a tempeh fail. I don't remember, like, if I think that it just, didn't knit together nicely, and so I put it out on the compost, and it's covered pile, and it was so lovely. I had other things out there, deadhead from flowers and things, and I lifted the lid a few days later, and that environment was perfect, and the whole top of the compost had become basically a cake of tempeh. So I don't think that is a disaster, but it was pretty cool.
That's exciting.
I think it would have fed some worms really nicely. They'd have been like, "Oh, this is unusual. We like it."
For sure.
Yeah, I think the way you describe your disasters is insightful for people too, because again, if you think about our ancestors, the only way they survived was they didn't say, well, that smelled bad. I guess it's just the grocery store for me from now on. They said, well, that smelled bad. Geez, I really want to eat. So let's figure something out. And I love that, you just keep creatively using those things to learn. Like you said, oh, I let too much air in. I didn't burp it enough. You took data from that, which is the way we should be doing things.
And that's the thing I do try to tell people is once you understand, and it doesn't take much to understand, it just takes kind of paying attention and walking through those ferments. But once you understand what's going on and you are connected in that way, and that can be however you view the world. It can be in more of a sort of a woo-woo way, or it can be in more of a scientific way, like these are the lactobacillus, this is what they need, this is what they're doing. These are the yeasts, this is what they need, this is what they're doing. You give anybody sugar, they love it. But once you have a bit of that connection and you understand that the dials that you do have control of, because you don't have control of the fermentation, which our dials, of course, are temperature, it's basically the environment, salt, and things like that. Once you get that, then it opens it up. It's so much easier to not feel like I did. This is a real aside, I'm sorry, but I really did have somebody tell me that they couldn't understand why some ferments worked and some didn't on some days. And they kind of got it down to when they were wearing a certain pair of socks, those days the ferments worked.
What?
And I was like, right? And I was like, oh, okay. So let's start with how the microbes work. And, so once you have that concept of the environment and what they need, like the world is your oyster. It's just, you can keep playing and turning tiles.
Maybe their ferments worked on the days they were the fuzzy or the thin socks, because they were the days their house was nice and warm and everything.
There you go.
Well.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I like the fact that you use the word connection a lot, because that's what it's about. You said your fermentation disasters, in quotes, happen when you've kind of neglected your ferments, and feels to me like the fermentation process is about connection. That the more intimate you get, and the list, you don't have to give a lot of time, but just to give your thoughts to what you're fermenting a little bit, so you remember to go back and check it or burp it or feed it or whatever it needs doing, then it kind of becomes part of you and your life. You're connected to it, and it moves along and it develops as your life moves along, while you're there going about your day. All the things are bubbling and carrying on, and they're connected with you. And really, it feels like an intimate process to me, like that.
For sure. And I do feel like, for folks that don't live in a space where they, can go out and connect on a daily basis with just, nature or whatever, it is a wonderful way to kind of bring the ecosystem and the, in this little jar, you've got so much of the larger whole going on.
Great point. I never thought about it that way, creating your own little barnyard in a jar.
For sure.
So with all this amazing experience, can you tell me, I had actually heard of the fermentation school before Allison was telling me about it. So I certainly was aware of you out in the ether. But could you tell me a little bit about, you alluded some to it in the beginning, but why you started the fermentation school, and what is the aim or the goal of the fermentation school?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fermentation school was, 100% COVID pivot. I'd gotten to the point where I really was traveling all over the world to ferment with people, which, was both wonderful and for me horrifying. I've spent a lot of time, not driving places and not going places, just to keep my footprint a little lighter on this planet. And, there I was in the concept or guise or whatever of trying to help make the planet a better place, sitting on airplanes a lot. So I'd been wanting to do online classes for a long time, but the thought of talking into a camera and doing that just always, so many people are uncomfortable with that, and I'm one of them. And so, really, when we were at home, Christopher and I, Christopher's done a lot of this with me, we taught ourselves. He taught himself the whole videoing and editing and all of that, and I, got over myself and started putting classes out there. And simultaneously, a good friend of mine, Meredith Lee, was doing the same with her charcuterie and butchery and all the classes that she had been also traipsing around the world to do. And we had individual platforms, and at some point really early on we decided that it makes so much more sense, especially as so much was being thrown out there on the internet, to have this collaboration of trying to find one place to put our energy into, so that more voices pointing to one spot instead of more voices just trying to get heard. And yeah, so that was the genesis of the together part, and then it immediately was, and we should add more women to this, and really make it something besides just her and I trying to hot classes. I think early on, and it's still in my dream world, is that, so we set up as a benefits corporation, the idea being triple bottom line, and that there's good coming out of it as well. And we want to, of course, support the voices of independent educators and all of that, but we also would love to have a fund for kind of taking that further, and that could be somebody can write to us. Right now it's just small enough we can offer scholarships, but I'd love it to be something where we sponsor people to teach classes in food deserts or their area where they need just help getting some cutting boards and bowls and jars together or whatever, just real small grants to continue that idea of the fermentation education, just moving out there like mycelium growing. So that's really a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, I love that. It's fabulous.
I've got another question on it. Why is it that you've chosen to just have women teachers or people who identify as women teaching in the school? What's the significance of that?
I think we just, as women in the space, both of us have been pushed aside for the, the chef or the butcher or the male colleague who, while they're amazing, wonderful creators, whoever that might be, it just felt like women are such the bearers of this ancestral knowledge, and we wanted to kind of sort of shine a light on that because I feel like the men that are out there doing great things with all the subjects are doing great things, and the women just get, as in many places, just a little less voice. And so that was, I think that, and just that whole idea of the women as keepers of the ancestral knowledge traditionally, and bringing that into the ethos.
Yeah, I mean, if people go to your site, which is fermentationschool.com, you just see there, it's a growing list of teachers, but already there are so many teachers on there providing such a breadth of knowledge over various ferments. And it feels like a really beautiful celebration of women fermenting and the variety. And I certainly feel as a teacher that you said earlier, rather than lots of little voices kind of trying to get this information out there, how wonderful it is, it feels like this sort of vibrant hub of teachers who all have different areas that they love that are coming together and sharing the information in one place, which feels so much more powerful than certainly I felt as an individual, sort of in my corner saying, oh, this is what I ferment and this is what I do. It coming together, there's a much wider breadth of knowledge and information available to people who want to ferment. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, and then part of what we, didn't know, but what we ended up doing, Meredith and I, is really supporting women who just need help to figure out either how to get the class made, or how to market themselves, or all of that. And so it feels good to do that in this gig society that we've found ourselves in. Used to be you could be a writer and make a living, and now you can't so much. I mean, yeah, I guess, the movie rights for fermented vegetables probably won't ever come out. So, I'm not that kind of writer, and so many of the platforms and all the things, it's like they want it for free, or you can write for, write for exposure. It's like, well, exposure, real talk here, exposure doesn't put groceries on the table.
No,
or pay the power bill. It just doesn't. And so I think that's another huge piece, is we've got women who are, moms, and they can't go out and get a regular job, but they've got this wonderful knowledge, and they've got passion, and how exciting to be able to help them support their family in a small way, by having this platform and offering that support. And we, Meredith and I are also very inspired by all of the creators that we work with. It's just wonderful to hear new ideas and to have that. And then partway through, I think last January, we made it official, but another wonderful fermentation expert, Jory Jane, MD, she had her small little school, the School of Funk. Love the name. And she, had reached out to us about merging. And so there's, Meredith and I, the original co-founders, but Jory has also come in with a lot of, kind of from the same place that we came in, having created this school by herself originally as well.
Lovely. Tell the listeners what the courses that you're teaching are on the Fermentation School.
Okay, let's see what I can remember. I teach from mastering fermented vegetables. I try to make sure you understand, like I talked about earlier, kind of understand what's going on so you can ferment anything you want. So there's obviously recipes, but I really also try to go beyond recipes. It's kind of like the loaves thing, either give them bread or teach them to bake bread. So that's kind of my hope there. there's a fermented hot sauces class, same idea. A wild yeast class that called Flower Power. That's one of my favorites. Tempeh, a really complete tempeh class. Here's a vinegar class. So here's an example. Jory is an amazing vinegar maker, and her main courses on her site were vinegar courses. And so, when she joined, obviously now there was 2 vinegar courses, and people can buy her courses or my course. And it's really good because they're both very different. And so we bundled them together for people that didn't want to decide and wanted to kind of get both of our kind of angles on it and have a vinegar bundle. So that's been another nice thing, is bundling courses with other teachers. Sort of long term, I'd love to see it as like a little fermentation university where you can actually take a track and, maybe it's a soils track, and you also get, with composting and soil building, you also get miso making. Anyway, I also teach a fermentation challenge. I teach a miso class. And yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, a garlic class, a fun little garlic class on all the ways you can ferment some garlic.
So there's lots up there. If people go to the site, fermentationschool.com, and then there's a button on the homepage that says search course catalogue. And then there are some sorts at the top. So you could click on Kirsten's name and see all the courses that she has to offer. And there are also other ways of looking through the course catalogue, which is growing. Let's talk about the 30-day fermentation challenge now that you just mentioned, because this episode's going out in January, which feels like a really good time for people to make positive changes in their kitchen or their diet with their food. And Andrea and I have just completed the 30-day fermentation challenge course that you have on the site.
It's amazing. This is an amazing one.
we really loved it, and we want to share with the listeners kind of the scope of that course and why we think it's such a good introduction to, but also push forward for people who've already started fermenting. Could you talk a little bit just about that 30-day course for us?
Sure. That was a fun course to put together. And the idea was to, like you said, both for people that want to step into it, or that want to be, want to try to get it. They already ferment maybe a little bit, but they want to get it into their life as a habit. Hence the 30 days, sort of that everyday kind of idea. And then also for people that just, want to do something fun and get some new ideas. But the idea being that to include a little bit of something fermented in your life every day it's not hard. It sounds daunting, but it's not hard. And so in the challenge, I thought it would be nice to make a couple of simple ferments that are, basic. And also, I set it up so that at some point you're making some sauerkraut, but you can also buy the sauerkraut to start using it in ways. And the reason, I did that is I wanted to show people also that you don't always have to, start from zero and make your own. Of course, it's wonderful to make your own, but if you're just trying to get these foods to be part of your lifestyle, you want to start where you're at. So the idea is just to really have this gentle introduction and little kind of walk through, fermentation in what is possible.
Mm-hmm. Before I ask Andrea about what her favourite bits of the course were, I want to, so I don't forget, I want to tell the listeners that there's a 10% discount available to listeners on Kirsten's course. If you go to fermentationschool.com and when you put it into your basket, put in the discount code AKP, all caps, standing for Ancestral Kitchen Podcast, AKP, and you will get 10% off that course. And actually, you will get 10% off any of the courses on the Fermentation School. So if another one catches your eye as well, you can get a discount on that. Andrea, talk about your favourite bits of the course, because both of us have gone through all of it and have been talking about what we like and what we want to bring into our kitchens.
Yeah. Well, what I love about the course, and I was telling Allison this, is that it's exactly what you said, Kirsten. If you are a proficient fermenter, I mean, I think Allison and I both been fermenting for, I don't know, at least 10 or 15 years. And yet there's things in here that you made that I've never made before. So, but also if you had never fermented anything, you could start this and you really explain everything in a non-complex, non-fear-based way that makes it a really good introduction to fermenting. So just so people know, she's covering the range in here, the cider kefir, fermented oats, which of course Allison and I are huge fans of, soaking beans even, and then your hummus, which is fantastic, the kimchi. I opened up the course on the computer so I could scroll through it, and there's so many things on here. So if you love good food, and something Allison and I always say is when you're trying to eat really nutritious, nutrient-dense food on a budget, a great way, again, from the wisdom of our ancestors to do that is to ferment it, because you will literally get more out of the same cabbage that you bought when you ferment it. Then I think this would be the perfect start.
Yeah, and that's
continuation.
Such a good point, is you get so much more out of the food that you're eating.
Right.
The two things that there were two things in the course that you suggested buying in because they're not involved in the course, but that kind of piqued my curiosity and gave me new ideas: the natto and the tempeh. Now I know you've actually written a book that includes tempeh and natto. I've never tried those ferments. And listening to how you've used them, because I think part of it was I didn't really know how to use them, so I didn't know what to do with natto. I'd seen it on the shelf in the health food store, but I was just like, how can I eat this? And there are recipes in the course for using it, some of which are quite unorthodox, that then makes me think, well, I could use it for this and I could use it for this. And also tempeh, I've never used or even tasted. And seeing you get enthusiastic about tempeh in the course has made me want to start with, just to go and find some that an expert has already made and I can purchase, and then to kind of bring that in and see how I like the taste, how I like to serve it. And you go through how to serve tempeh in it. So as well as giving like recipes for kimchi where you've got your hands in and there's videos showing how to do it, you're right that it's a lot of it is giving new ideas. And as well as Andrew, I agree that it gave me lots of new ideas. The other thing that I liked about it was the idea of, like you say, including it in your everyday life.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
a lot of the questions that Andrew and I get are from women whose families are not used to this kind of thing, and so they'll be completely on board with, I've made some sauerkraut, I've made some kimchi, but I can't get my husband to eat it, or I'm not sure how to get my children to eat it. And early on in the course, one of your suggestions, one of the recipes, is to mix the one of the ferments up with some cream cheese. And I never even thought of doing that, but to kind of soften the flavour and then to spread it on some familiar bread. I just think it's a fabulous way to present a ferment to someone who perhaps is a little bit suspicious of the flavour. And it feels like all the way through the course, you're helping us to make these ferments part of our life, rather than just oh, we've got this project that we're going to do on the side, and that's that done.
Yes,
Actually
I
eating it
agree.
and sharing it with our
Yes.
families and our friends every day. Was that a specific? That was a specific intention when you started to try and sort of soften those bits that are sometimes hard to get across.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that would be, you know, when you go back to the earlier question, what do I get most often? That would be right after that is how do I use these foods? And I have to say I give everybody permission to covertly add ferments to whatever they can think of adding ferments to,
You heard
because
it here first, people.
I am not
Permission
I
granted.
am not above hiding things in food. Obviously, I'm not going to hide something that is going to hurt anybody, but for my family, I know what everybody can eat and what
Right, right.
and and I I know that the microbes will eventually win, right? Because our cravings come from who's kind of camped out and living in our microbiome, not from us. And so, if you start sneaking some of those ferments in, your your body will eventually start craving them, and so you can get more obvious with them at some point, but start saying that you're that's what you're eating.
Yeah,
Anyway, yeah,
you actually.
I'm completely on board with chopping things and putting them in very familiar foods.
Yeah.
I feel like meeting people where they're at, and so like you mentioned natto, and natto is a very difficult food for Western palates. It's a wonderful traditional. I mean that's the thing too is to go off on a little tangent is soy has a bad rap in the Western world for the most part, and it isn't a great food unfermented, but fermented it's a completely different food. And like natto, for example, has it's the highest form of vitamin K that you can get, and it leaps and bounds over or K2 over what we can get out of kind of a similar ferment, which is, if is cheeses. Natto has sort of nutty coffee flavors, but it also has kind of flavors like a aged brie or camembert or something like that. A stinky cheese,
Yeah.
and so the way to start like introducing it, its biggest issue I think is it's got a strong smell, like I said, like a stinky cheese, but a challenging texture. That there is a viscosity,
Uh-huh.
a sliminess, or whatever you want to call it. That neba, the strings. But if you chop a little bit of natto up and now put that into some kind of energy ball, or something with lots of good nuts and good fats and this, that, and the other, and some dried fruit, you will not taste it, and it will, those little strings, if you find them, will kind of have that same thing that a Cliff Bar has, sort of that stringiness that comes in that case from the sugar. And so, there's lots of ways to take vegetable ferments or more unusual ferments and just start putting them into using them like an ingredient instead of that like front and center. That's I think where it gets scary or boring for people if it's just like, here, this is plopped on your plate every day, this sauerkraut, eat it because you have to. That that this is medicine, not food, but turning that on its head a little bit and calling it an ingredient and making it part of what's making something else taste good.
Yeah,
That's
that
also a
definitely
great
comes
point going
across.
into, yeah, yeah. And going into the new year, since I'm sure a lot of people are going to be signing up for this course, after they hear this in January, a lot of people have health goals going into a new year, but you're coming out of a standard American diet where your cravings have been shaped by heavily processed foods. Then taking this course and learning how to incorporate this stuff in a non-frightening, non-gross way would be amazing to get those microbes to take over and,
Exactly. And,
not
things
fighting your
like,
nature.
exactly. And you guys had mentioned the fermented oats and things like that. I mean, if you're fermenting them overnight, I've got two different kinds in there. One is a more Russian style, and one is just more of an overnight ferment. But
Right.
both of them, you're not changing the flavor so much in a noticeable way, but you're changing that structure of the food in ways that your body really notices.
Right. Your
And so,
body will
yeah,
know for sure.
so that non-threatening is right on point.
Yeah.
Andrew, is there anything else you want to ask Kirsten?
Well, there are lots of threads, lots of Niba threads
Yeah.
there that I wanted to grab onto, but they would be a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I won't do that. But I just find all of this really fascinating and down to the, first of all, the very structure of your school, where all of us can come in from wherever we are, like you said, and not necessarily having to travel. And take these courses. And I told Allison, isn't it insane that somebody can go to your website and just get access to 20 years of your brain, just like that, like all that experience. It's really valuable. And I know you've got 5 books out, I think. So if somebody wanted to have more fireside reading to support their fermenting, then she's got the cider book that grabbed my attention immediately.
Yeah.
So
It is.
there's some books out there.
Yeah. There's. I mean, that's what I love about the school and is that access that somebody can instantly access, whoever's brain and have time with them. It's all self-paced and lifetime access, and so the idea is that you can take each of the classes at your pace. Although I have to say, since we've talked a lot about the 30-day course, that one is dripped out one day at a time.
Yes,
And so
that was nice.
I did that on purpose so that people, try to help people stick to that 30-day idea. Obviously, they don't have to. They can just let it drip out and take it some other day. But the idea being that if I tried to set it up so that, there were no surprises. I would warn you what's coming if you needed to know, but otherwise, you didn't feel overwhelmed by what's coming either. It wasn't all 30 days laid out. It was like, okay, today you're just going to go grocery shopping and you're going to get yourself ready.
Yeah.
So all but that course, you can binge through, or you can take your time.
I feel like this is a good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, Allison.
No, go on.
I was going to say, I feel like this course is a good place to start because when you go through your whole website, there's a ton of stuff on there.
Mm.
And when you go through here, it kind of gives you that framework to hang all those other things off of.
Yeah.
So you've got your interest piqued by kimchi, and now you have 33 ideas of how you're going to use kimchi. And then if that's the thing that just really caught your eye in this course, go through and take a specific course on that one specific thing, and just expand your knowledge on that, which I think that's a really cool feature of the whole school.
That's what I was going to say. We'll put a link to the course in the show notes, but people can just go to fermentationschool.com and search for it. But you can actually see a kind of a layout of the whole course, so you can see kind of what's what's involved. And then when you sign up before you start, you see day one and you get your first day information. And like Kirsten said, it's stripped out, but you can see what's coming over the next 30 days as well. So you can see right through to the last day, which is a cake, which I just watched today, which looks absolutely delicious with fermented cranberries on. But you can see what's coming. And then, like Andrea said, if natto is something that piques your fancy, you can go off and go into that. But it does give you the kind of a structure to move forward with for fermenting, which I think is a great place to start as well. Okay, so I'll put the discount code AKP in the show notes. We'll put that in, and we'll put a link to the course in. Where else can people find you, Kirsten, aside from the Fermentation School?
So my own website is ferment.works. Boy, if you scroll through there, you'll see some very early stuff that I did. That website's been around for a long time. And then my books are available anywhere you buy books. I'm always like to remind folks to look for their local bookseller. But yeah, so there's, as you guys mentioned, there's 5 books. There's Fermented Vegetables, Fiery Ferments, and then Miso Tempeh Natto, which is a big book of all things grains and beans fermented. Also, each of the books has the back section is recipes of how to use these things once you've made them. Then we did a cider book. That's more Christopher's book. My Little Vinegar chapter got kicked out and became its own vinegar book. And so, yeah, it was kind of a good thing after all, because then I got to open it up to all the things I can make vinegar with, not just apples.
Right. No, I think that's awesome.
Wonderful. Well, Andrea, if you don't have any more questions for Kirsten, well, certainly not that we can fit in this episode, I will say thank you ever so much for your time, Kirsten. We know that you are really busy with everything at the Fermentation School and all your other stuff. So we really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely to talk to you both.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Allison's at Ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.